The Oracle of Luna is a podcast with me, Bridget Engels, as your host. Here we have conversations with real live, present-day goddesses who are actively and courageously doing their magical work in the world. Each episode is a bewitching journey with relevant discussions on topics such as Wiccan pagan spirituality, writing, culture, magical practices, art, ritual, and the craft in its many forms. Hello, listeners! I'm so grateful for the listener interest over the last few years, and I want to keep this podcast inspiring to you with my amazing goddess guests and to amplify the voice of the divine feminine in the world today. This podcast takes time, effort, and resources to share with you every few weeks. I have an ask of you. One of the ways to support the Oracle of Luna podcast is to become a subscriber to premium and bonus material. Each of the podcast episodes have 2 links at the bottom. It's quick and easy, should probably take you 1 minute, and for as little as $3 a month, you can support the show and become a subscriber. I really appreciate it, and it means a lot. Thank you, and blessed be. Merry meet! Welcome to another episode of the Oracle of Luna podcast. I'm Bridget Engels, your host, and today I am thrilled to chat with Lorraine Monteagut, Ph.D. Lorraine is a queer Latine witch and author of BRUJAS, The Magic and Power of Witches of Color. Lorraine's scholarship in occult ancestral spiritualities traces the diverse traditions of contemporary magical practices. Her second book, Modern Witchcraft for Dummies, is forthcoming in April 2025. Lorraine is the creator of Witchy Heights, a community space for practical magic and spiritual activism. Stay tuned to the end when Lorraine gives us a short ancestral invocation. Welcome, Lorraine.
Thank you so much for having me. Hi.
Yeah, I'm so happy to talk with you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm in this moment of transition, moving to across the country. So you're catching
Oh,
me in this in-between phase, which is, lovely. I love
yeah.
transitions. Yeah,
Yeah, very magical and potent, right?
they are. Yes. If a little disruptive, they're
Yeah.
worth it sometimes.
Yeah. Well, I wish you luck with your move. That sounds like a big one. So
Thank
we have a
you.
lot to unpack here, so I'm just gonna get rolling. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. Well, as I always start my show with my guests, I'm wondering, how did your spiritual journey with divine feminine or witchcraft begin?
So with witchcraft, it was pretty early in life. I would say puberty-ish, having grown up watching The Craft as so many of us in my generation as a millennial did. And I was really interested in the occult at the time and had some touch points with my family. My great grandmother was a spirit medium in Cuba.
Mm.
And while that wasn't considered witchcraft at the time, and they would have never called her a witch, my family, I was just very interested in what she did. And then just taking what I could learn from the cultural moment, from what was available to me, which tended to be, European traditions and what was on TV. So I just held on to what I could, read the books I could, and called myself a witch from a pretty young age. I would say maybe 12-ish, 11, 12, 13.
Oh, yeah, that is pretty young. Do you have any?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just curious. Do you want to expand on your grandmother or your other family members and her background? Because
Yes.
she sounds pretty special and magical.
Yeah, she was. She was my great grandmother, but
Okay.
raised me as a grandmother because her daughter, my grandmother, who is my dad's mother, died when she was about my age now, which is wild to think about in her early
Mm.
40s.
Oh.
Um, and I never got to meet her. But my great grandmother Elvira, she had a witchy name, Elvira or Elvira. She I heard about the work that she'd done in Cuba, putting on these, they're called misas in Spanish. These like white table kind of, I guess we would call them seances today,
Uh-huh.
to connect people with their past loved ones. And she did this work pretty steadily in Cuba until she immigrated to this country. Shortly after my grandmother, her daughter died, she tried connecting with her through the veil and was unsuccessful. And I think that was the moment that she decided to leave her practice. And in assimilating to this country, she never really passed that on to me. When I asked her about it, she would just tell me to close my eyes and pray things away if I was confronted with spirits or anything like that. And so
Mm.
it was kind of a bummer as a young
Yeah.
budding witch. I really wanted to know, but I think at that point she was really, she had, I wouldn't say converted to Christianity. I think Christianity was always right there, in tandem with her work. But they were not about talking. The old Cubans didn't want to talk about what had happened in the old country. So
Yeah.
we kind of put that to bed, and I found other venues
Mm-hmm.
for my expression.
Yeah. So what are brujas? And what do they do? Just so our listeners can get an idea.
Yeah. Bruja is the Spanish word for witch. So it is very broad. It comes loaded, just like the word witch does. It has, a stigma attached to it in some cultural instances. And when I was growing up, it wasn't something that you aspired to be or could just freely say, I am a bruja. It was something that was sought after, healers and women usually who did workings that were sought in secret. So in my lifetime and in the modern moment, we're seeing this kind of reclaiming of the word bruja, just like we've seen with witch.
Yeah.
And it means a lot of different things depending on who you speak with. But I see that in my work, interviewing many people from many different traditions across the country and across the world, it really just connects to their particular cultural or ancestors, the work that they are doing. And it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of this, you know, identity that is burgeoning and continues to evolve, just as Witch does, um, to encompass all the new things that we're doing. We're connecting and quote unquote reclaiming our past, but we're also creating something new in this moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what is new? What feels new as far as brujeria or
Yeah,
brujas go? Sorry if I'm
we
mispronouncing.
had to. No, you're not. It's perfect. Brujas. Brujas,
Brujas.
however you want to say it. Sometimes people say with the gender neutral brujex with an
Mm.
X,
Okay.
or bruje with an E. We're always playing with the gender of it, but there's brujas and brujos, all gendered kind of versions of the word. Um, and what was the question again?
I was just kind of curious if like what does that mean now in the moment?
Yeah,
And creating something new, you know,
right,
forward
right. I
instead of
think.
from our past or from our family's past.
Yes, totally. So I see this, brujas are just like witchcraft has always kind of been intimately tied to feminist movements. I see the bruja kind of emerging in this moment of intersectional feminism where witches of color are taking the lead, adding their own lexicon, their own cultural mythologies to this larger witchcraft movement that has largely been marked by like European tradition. So when I was a kid, though I was Cuban and Colombian, I didn't have my own cultural kind of touchstones to go on when it came to modern witchcraft. So I kind of borrowed from Euro-paganism, from Wicca or from traditional witchcraft, from pop culture. And now Brujas are seeing, there's other things from their past that they are pulling from, but they're also coming together and creating new communities. A lot of these are around activism and around, um, advancing cultural awareness, avoiding cultural appropriation in ancestral practices, going out and protesting, standing up for the rights of marginalized communities. Um, all sorts of communities, queer communities, disabled communities. So we're starting to see the Bruja as like this kind of nexus of all of the new pathways that witchcraft is taking, I think.
And I think it would be interesting to try and go back and find out what our ancestors how they celebrated their magic. I mean, I don't know what my
Yes.
Danish ancestors did, but I know they did something way back when. But
Yes.
I think
This
that
is when this
in
is
discovering that is kind of detective work, right?
It is, and this is where the study of folk magic comes in, and you really start to learn about the land from which you come
Yeah.
and the customs and the rituals of indigenous folks of the land where you come from and what your family did. But there's also cultural ancestors that are not even blood related that you could reach to. So I kind of
Mm,
broadened the idea of ancestor to include not just hereditary or blood ancestors, but like this kind of connection to folk magic in the land.
yeah. So, when did you begin to connect with the power of words and writing? Did that happen in college or before then?
Oh man, that was probably way early. Yeah, as early as I could write, I believe. I thought, I always thought I was going to be a writer. Um, I just loved reading and writing and was always writing little stories. I was always interested in magic, and one of my dear heroes in life just passed, Michelle Trachtenberg. I
Hmm.
don't know if you know her or heard her of her passing, but she was an actor, was in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which was extremely formative to me as a witch. Time I saw, yeah, a queer witch on TV, but she played Dawn, the little sister, but she
Yeah.
also before that she played Harriet the Spy. And she was this little girl who observed and had a journal and would write down everything she saw, and it's because she wanted to remember everything. And I think I had that, whatever that is, that little journalistic kind of spirit or investigator spirit to write everything down and mull things over and understand how things worked. And that was always just something I did. So it kind of felt natural to
Yeah.
evolve in that way.
Yeah, that's cool. And so tell us a little bit about your previous book. The one we're kind of discussing is Bruja, the Magic of Power, Brujas, the Magic and Power of Witches of Color. And what inspired you to write this book?
So I hinted at it a little earlier, but I felt that the books that I was reading about witchcraft centered on European traditions or Greco-Roman mythologies.
Mm,
Um,
yeah. And especially like Celtic. There's such a emphasis on
right.
Celtic.
Yeah. And if you look at the history of these traditions, they were not originally, quote unquote witchy mythologies. It took a movement um, to reconstruct these traditions toward modern witchcraft.
Yeah.
And I think we're seeing that in other ways in different cultures now, and it's still forming and is not as, solidified as the Celtic mythologies and witchcraft are. So, but we're starting to see that, with African mythologies as brujas or other witches of color are taking these ancestral mythologies from the mainland of Africa that had been dispersed and disseminated across the Afro-Caribbean diaspora, into the Latin America, we're seeing these people trace these kind of mythologies to what the witch is today. And so we're always kind of bringing in new mythologies and outfitting them for the witch of today. And
Mhm.
so Brujas was my first kind of stab at bringing together many different threads of people who are doing this work, of people who identified as Brujas, but they each had their own lineage, different traditions, different regions of the world that they're coming from.
Mhm.
And yeah, we're all kind of trying to figure out what this is, figure out how does this connect to modern witchcraft.
In your book, you speak about magical activism. Why is magical activism so relevant to us now in 2025? And
Oh
what
boy.
what is magical activism? Is it doing ritual? I'm just curious
hmm
if you could kind of enlighten us a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's a really broad term, magical activism or spiritual activism. I think it's an orientation in your values in terms of your practice towards changing the world for the better. Um, I think that when we center our values in our personal practice, we're doing more than just feeling good or connecting spiritually just on an individual level. We're kind of expanding to the collective and creating spiritual aid and spiritual communities that can help each other. And I
Yeah,
think this is going to be needed more and more in this political landscape that's you know
definitely.
uh, yeah, that's really like kind of like, um, tense and people are looking for answers and help. And I think that centering our values and understanding why we do the things we do, are we being respectful of practices and traditions that are close to us? How does our work impact the world? I think it's really important to center these because, so much that has become trendy, you know, um, could be harmful for communities, indigenous communities whose natural resources are being overharvested, for instance, or spiritual tourism that goes and exploits, you know, um, services without giving back to those communities.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking of like psychedelic, kind of like ayahuasca or, shamanistic kind of voyages where, what is the purpose, and I think spiritual activism kind of centers that why. What is it that we're doing besides just enlightening our own individual selves or feeling good?
Yeah. Yeah, it's you said something about giving back to the communities. How can we give back? What are some ways that we can give back to some of these indigenous communities?
Yeah, I think doing your research about what organizations are already existing in your community, what are the ancestral communities of your land, um, are there ways to, contribute? Like some places have like a tax that you can volunteer to give to the stewards of the land, for instance. Part of these larger land back movements that you're starting to see crop up across the country.
Mm-hmm.
Um, looking to support Indigenous voices or voices of color in these spaces. Also, supporting community spaces that are just for marginalized groups or closed groups and, respecting that. I think there's many different ways, and I think consent and relationships are important. So just making
Yeah.
relationships and having open communication with people and, you know, just positioning yourself as a helper and learning. I think learning is the key. It's the number one thing is expanding your horizons and being curious and authentic in your seeking of knowledge.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's so much we don't know. I just I'm looking at the cover of your book and
Yeah.
I'm seeing the witch on the cover staring down at the candle and there's she has an altar behind her, but there's so much that we don't know about the indigenous cultures, mythologies and folklore and traditions. There's so much to learn and we have to approach it with our eyes open and our hearts open.
Yes. Yes, I agree. Because, there's a tendency to want to, create simple narratives. And the truth is that nothing is that simple, and we're all
Yeah,
very complex and come from all different perspectives.
absolutely. So in your book, I was reading about ancestral curses or the mother wound and some of the really tragic stories and how are they passed down? What is an ancestral curse and how are they passed down through generations? Because I feel like every family has some kind of curse.
Oh,
Some,
yes. Every
so,
family does. Yeah, this is kind of one of those trendy, buzzy things that can be taken too literally. I'm sure there are like some like true curses that were intended as curses. But a lot of the time, this is stuff that goes unspoken. That's just stuff that hasn't been dealt with or out in the open. And so when I talked about like kind of my great grandmother's stuff and how she didn't want to share that part of her, and there was so much in that sharing that could have illuminated so much for me about where we come from,
yeah,
about what we went through in our home countries, and maybe kind of helped me with whatever I was going through and continue to as I age, this feeling of kind of like home of drifting and not having a home center. I think that these things these things affect like silences affect people
yeah,
generationally a lot.
yeah. I
Things
mean,
that
it's
go
built into our,
unspoken.
oh, sorry, it's built into our DNA, some of these curses, some of these tragic. I kind of view it as like we're all like trees, and with the rings of the trees, there's like a disruption in one of the rings, and it's like I almost feel
Definitely.
like
Yes.
we all have that there because there's previous generations and ancestors way back. Think of all their struggles and their stress and their traumas and stories, and it's like I think we're all built of that, right? We're all
Yes,
created of
yes.
that.
Yes, but we're also created of wonderful moments that sometimes don't get communicated to us either. The things,
Yeah,
the mundane things that, just coming from an immigrant house or family where we didn't have heirlooms, passed down to us, or these kind of like mundane things that contain so much history and so many personal stories. And kind of the absence of that led me to be a seeker and wanting to fill in those gaps wherever I could. So, it doesn't have to be as dramatic as a curse that somebody like actually cursed someone, which does happen, but I think it's more of this kind of like unhealed wound. My grandmother, my line of grandmothers, the that suffered and just wanted us to have a better life, but they never got to enjoy that for themselves. So part of me breaking this curse is to enjoy my life, and to like do as much joyful work as I can.
yes, yes. I believe in yes, and create life affirming things and stories and projects.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think you kind of answered this previously, but how can we like some of us who don't have a lot of spiritual background or witchy backgrounds, how can we cultivate a connection with our ancestors and maybe try and reconnect with their stories wherever we live or whatever our background or ethnicity is? Is there, I don't know, are there some ways you might have answered this already?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I'm a material girly and I just love an altar. So, and this is, a very common practice, not just an ancestral veneration, but I think creating an ancestral altar is a great start. It's a physical manifestation of the connection you want to make to your lineage and to your past. Um, like I said before, ancestors I don't think need to be blood related. Sometimes we have kind of harrowing relations with our blood relatives and it's hard to go there. But I personally, have my grandmothers on my altar, and learning about them and having pictures of them and speaking to them, that helps me greatly. But your ancestors can be maybe land spirits, for instance, like what land are you on? What is the nature
Yeah.
there? Like what soil are you on? Can you put some soil on your altar? What are the indigenous flora and fauna of your region that you can help support? um, just cultural stories, myths that you grew up with, that were told in your community, community elders that may not be blood related but feel close and feel like spiritual teachers to you. So there's many different ways that you can connect to your ancestry without having this kind of like expectation that you must be a hereditary witch.
Right. Right. Yeah. And sometimes, some of us can feel that pressure like, oh, I don't have an altar. Oh, I don't look like a witch, or oh, I'm not, cool enough to be a witch or witchy pagan person, but, yet I want to connect spiritually to ancestors or my magic.
Yeah. Certainly, you don't have to look like anything, and your altar doesn't have to be much. It could just be a focal point. It just helps me to have something to focus on and to go to. But you really don't need much. You can just be outside, or you can call on an ancestor wherever you are. You could even call on pop culture kind of icons, like I was mentioning, Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yeah.
That in
Yeah.
some ways, those are some ancestors of mine just because they have kind of drilled their way into
That's
my
interesting.
identity.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
didn't think of that, but yeah, I grew up with Bewitched, and I'm a little older.
Right.
She's an icon, and I could consider
Totally.
her an ancestor. She was pretty smart and witchy for her time, but
Right. It was the people, yeah, it was the people who kind of helped you form your idea of what a witch is.
exactly, exactly. So that could mean anybody that you can connect to on a magical level, really.
Yes. Yeah. But I do think that there is a special process of kind of digging into your ancestry from wherever your starting point is and finding out a little bit about where you come from. It's been pretty transformative for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know some of my family members have kind of dug into ancestry.com, and there's been some surprises, but it's interesting.
Yeah.
I'd like to delve in more myself and actually go to some of these places that they came from. But yeah,
Yeah,
interesting. It's
it's
all
interesting
interesting.
to visit. Yeah, to visit
Yeah.
is an interesting thing. I visited Cuba, now it's been 10 years ago. And it was interesting to go to quote unquote back to a place I had never been in the first place. And it kind of it kind of threw this whole idea of reclaiming up for kind of for me to mull over because I we say reclaiming as if we once had this thing, but I had never been to this homeland, and so it was a recreation. It was like a new moment of like making new connections really
Yeah.
with a past that I had never known.
Yeah. And that in itself is powerful.
It really is. Yes.
So Lorraine, do you have any upcoming plans for the future, such as new books, events, classes, workshops, etc.?
Yes, I just put to bed my manuscript for Modern Witchcraft for Dummies, which is forthcoming from Wiley April 2025.
Woo,
So
that's coming up.
this is the yes, it's really soon. It's next month. And I poured myself into it the last half year, and it's kind of the culmination of my work in witchcraft studies. I wanted to kind of take a zoom out since I had been so focused on BRUJAS and kind of show what I know about this modern witchcraft mo moment for those who have maybe never experienced witches or understand what we mean by modern witchcraft. Just, some foundational information so people can start to orient themselves to what this all is all about.
Mm, that's fascinating. That sounds like a big book. Is there, how many pages are in this
Yeah,
book?
it's pretty big. I don't know
Yeah.
if you're familiar with the For Dummies series. They've been around
Yeah.
since the 80s, and
Yeah.
I remember my first For Dummies book was Microsoft Office for Dummies. So they've definitely come a long way with the topics. Definitely like have branched out more into like wellness and healing and spirituality. And I find a very interesting format because it is really direct and to the point. It's very much about organizing information in an easy way for people. So I found it to be a really helpful exercise for me to be clear about what it is that I mean
Hmm.
and provide as much organization and clarity for people who have never engaged with this topic before.
Oh, I can't wait to read it. That sounds excellent.
Thank
Yeah, because we definitely have in our listeners, we have a lot of new witches, and as well as older witches,
Yes.
but we have a lot of goddess, spiritual people out there who, that may know about goddesses and priestessing, but maybe not so much about witchcraft. So yeah, it's all good.
Oh, wonderful. And there's definitely a lot of overlap there. And I go into
Yeah.
that a bit, of course, with the goddesses,
Yeah.
especially the triple goddess.
Mm, cool. All right. So that's coming out very soon, April. Boy, just around the corner.
April
So
15th. April
yay.
15th, the major available at all major booksellers, wherever you find your books, but I always encourage people to go to independent bookstores.
Absolutely. Lorraine, what is your website and social media so that our listeners can find out more about you and your books and your magical offerings?
Yeah, it's Witchy Heights. So I'm on Instagram primarily, and I've got a website, witchyheights.com, which I'm in the process of transitioning and updating as I shift my life. I'm moving to Minneapolis, and
Oh, from Florida,
I
right?
from Florida. It's a really big move. I've been in Florida my whole life, native Floridian, and making a big change. So in this next phase, I think you'll see that I'll be sharing a lot of the work that I've done over the last decade, over the last, but particularly over the last year, building curriculum and writing this book. So I'm getting ready to do a big sharing kind of phase of information and helpful, hopefully helpful resources so that new and advanced witches alike could navigate all of the information that is out there.
Great. We would love to see that because I feel like there's a lot of resources on witches and witchcraft, but I think that some of it, like you say, can be just pretty trendy, and I think there needs to be a little bit more clarity and background and focus on it.
Yes, yeah, it's both broad and a million rabbit holes that you can go into. So I feel like my role is to show you the entrance to the rabbit holes if you so choose to dive in.
Yes, dive into the rabbit hole at your own risk.
Exactly.
All right. Well, Lorraine, we're going to leave a little time for you for just a minute or two to give us a short ancestral invocation. So
Yes.
take it
So
away.
thank you. So if you can, you know, go to a quiet space. If you do have an altar, you might sit in front of it. I like to light candles for my ancestors, or I like to place offerings that are kind of like representative of the four elements, like a chalice of water, some flowers, even food. So you'll have your own practice, but like get settled in a quiet, private space, and we will call on our lineage. Um, you might picture a line of people extending behind you and before you, and you are in this middle of this unbroken line. Ancestors of my blood, ancestors of my spirit, you who walked before me, who forged the path I now tread, I call to you across time and space, guiding spirits, wisdom keepers, silent watchers of my soul. Through earth, I honor your strength. Through fire, I awaken your wisdom. Through water, I call your memory. Through air, I breathe your presence into this space. Come forth, beloved ones, those who lived with courage, those who spoke with truth, those who could not speak their truth, those who loved with open hearts, those who did not have occasion to love fully, those whose names are forgotten, but whose essence lingers in my bones. Stand with me now, lend me your guidance, shield me from harm, walk beside me always. As I honor you, I honor myself. As I remember you, I remember my own power. And as I speak your names, and here feel free to speak the names of your own ancestors, I weave our spirits together in sacred bond. I thank you, I honor you, until we meet again.
Hmm.
And so it is.
Thank you. Blessed be. That was beautiful and powerful. Thank you, Lorraine.
Thank you so much. Thank
Yeah.
you for
Thank
having
you.
me. It was a
Yes,
pleasure.
absolutely. Thank you so much for inspiring us with your research and your perspectives on brujas, and the importance of honoring our own ancestral magic and reclaiming the spiritual traditions of our homelands, and creating new, recreating traditions and creating the new for our futures. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I'm excited for the future.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Good luck on your move and all your newness, all the new beginnings happening for you. Blessed be.
Thank you so much.
And thank you to our listeners. Thanks for joining us. All right. Well, I'm going to sign off now. Thank you and bye-bye.
Bye.